Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to see so many of you here tonight for a very exciting talk. I'm Raymond Robertson. I'm the director of the Mosbacher Institute for Trade, Economics, and Public Policy. And here at the Bush School, we're trying to do our part to increase the emphasis of Latin American studies and relationships here at the university. And so as part of that, we're trying to support the Beyond the Border Speaker Series, which has been brilliantly organized and moderated by our own Eileen Teague, an assistant professor here at the Bush School. She'll be moderating the discussion today and also introducing the speakers. So without any further ado, because I know everyone's here to see the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Teague. Professor Teague, please take it away.
Thank you, Raymond. I'm excited about this next chapter in our seminar series, The Other Side of the Border, Ties That Bind and Issues That Divide, where our community at the Bush School engages practitioners working on the border, Mexico, and Latin America. This fall, we are hosting two events, the first today on Zoom with Jhanisse Vaca Daza, who I will introduce in a moment, and the second on November 10th in person, fingers crossed, with border correspondent and author Alfredo Corchado, which we will also be broadcasting on Zoom. I'm grateful to your support during our pilot run of this speaker series last spring. This year, the series has been fortunate enough to enjoy support from the Mosbacher Institute, thanks to Miss Cindy Gauze for all of her help organizing these events, and from the Carlos H. Cantu Hispanic Education and Opportunity Endowment at Texas A&M, thanks in large part to the support of our colleagues in the College of Liberal Arts. What we wanted to do with The Other Side of the Border was highlight practitioner perspectives. That is, people involved in executing policy and the human impacts of policymaking. We architected this series to run in lockstep with our growing Latin America concentration here at the Bush School, as Professor Robertson was speaking about. And this year we expanded upon our pilot program to create opportunities for our graduate students to dialogue with our speakers and engage with their work. Earlier today, our Latin America concentrators were able to sit down with Jhanisse to talk about Bolivian politics and the greatest challenges of international aid distribution in a discussion moderated by one of our own graduate students. I'm incredibly excited to introduce our first speaker of this academic year, Ms. Jhanisse Vaca Daza, who provides a voice on environmental activism in the midst of Bolivia's political tumult. During the 2019 and 2020 fire seasons, all eyes were on the burning of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, with international criticism leveled against Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro and his handling of the crisis. However, international media and institutions were mainly silent about the fires in Bolivia. Jhanisse Vaca Daza, founder of the nonviolent and environmental Bolivian movement Standing Rivers, or Ríos de Pie, was one of many volunteers working on the ground in the Bolivian Amazon fires. Covering nearly 230,000 square miles, the Amazon rainforest in Bolivia ran ablaze across thousands of miles during the 2019 and 2020 fire seasons. Unlike Brazil, Bolivia's presidential leadership, first under Evo Morales, who later resigned and went into exile after substantial domestic unrest, and his successors, Jean Añez and Luis Arce, planned to accept international aid, but it came in the midst of a crisis of political legitimacy, which ultimately undermined the international community's aid efforts. Jhanisse Vaca Daza, a native of Bolivia, and her story illuminate the challenges of administering international aid amidst a complicated political situation on the ground. She will also speak about the contradictions in environmental policy implementation, often unknown to the international community. With the 2021 fire season already underway, Jhanisse discusses the local picture in Bolivia, the progress that has been made in fighting rainforest fires, and what environmental policy makers and informed citizens like you and me must know for confronting similar challenges in the future. Jhanisse, I'm going to give you the floor for about 35 minutes, after which point we'll open the floor for questions. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, so I'll ask please that you either direct message me or put in the chat your questions for Jhanisse. But without further ado, Jhanisse Vaca Daza, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much, Eileen, Mr. Robertson, Mrs. Goss, and everyone attending. Thank you for your time to listen and learn and share with me and with us about this very, very important topic. I start by apologizing because English is not my first language, so every now and then I might need some help or patience to find the right word, but I will do my best to try to explain to you what has been happening in my country, which is an ecocide according to international bodies, which we will discuss today, and also to show you so you can see with your own eyes images that are often seen only by us volunteers on the ground and that don't necessarily make it to the news. So I will be sharing my screen so you can see the presentation. And of course, I would be very, very happy to take questions from you once we are done with the presentation or read them on the chat as we begin. So today we will be talking about politics and the environment in the Bolivian Amazon. Again, my name is Jhanisse. I'm an activist. I'm the co-founder of Standing Rivers, Ríos de Pie, a movement in Bolivia that focuses on environmental and human rights issues through nonviolence. And I wanted to start this talk, although I often go against this, by giving you a little bit of a personal background and story, just to give you some more context to the lived reality of this session and of this problem before we talk about the actual legal framework and environmental causes that led to this problem. So the picture you are seeing was taken almost 2 years ago to this date. That was me arriving to Bolivia with suitcases. I had just been informed by my friends who are firefighters that they had been fighting the fires in the Amazon in Bolivia in the Chiquitano Forest region, and their shoes had been melting as they worked. They had tried to get new shoes that were proper for this type of work, but they hadn't found any places where they could buy them in Bolivia. Therefore, they had to be imported, but in order to import them, they had to wait for many months. Therefore, they really needed help and they didn't have anything. So of course, as any friend and any Latin American would do in a similar situation, I thought, well, I'm about to travel to Bolivia from New York. I can find a way to get some boots and gloves and masks as them for breathing, and just bring it for my friends. So I got 12 pair of boots. These were secondhand boots that I got by going to a fire station here and asked if they had anything they could spare. And since the Morales president had said publicly in the news that he had already declared a national emergency, in theory, legally, this type of aid that was so in such a small amount, and it was not new material, neither was it for commercial purposes, should be able to enter. However, once I got to the airport, I was detained in the immigration section. As you can see, even military servicemen came out. My belongings were taken away from me. I had to stay there for a couple hours. Even my passport was taken away. I was taken to a room where I was interrogated by customs officers. I can remember very vividly that there was a huge image of President Morales in the back in that big wall behind them. And for a long time, they told me that what I was doing was breaking the laws, that I was doing something illegal, that I would have a very big legal consequence to this, and that why was I trying to do something that was such clearly a crime. I kept explaining that this was not legal, that I had very well heard, as many other Bolivians had on the news, that the president had declared national emergency, which meant that any aid could enter the country easily. But this was definitely not the case. In the end, they allowed me to enter wearing only the clothes I had on me and my passport in my hand. They retained the suitcases with all of this equipment, and we had to do many things, including letters from firefighter units that were on the ground in order to, in the end, get this to come in. However, this was only the first of many situations of threats to my safety and that of people I was working with around these fires. But honestly, all of this is nothing compared to this image that is pretty much inked in my mind, and I think on that of many Bolivians, which is the fact that the firefighters were literally fighting without any help of support. And even though the president had said that he had declared national emergency, this legally never happened. Therefore, international aid was never allowed to enter Bolivia during the fires in 2019, which meant that firefighters had to fight with the very little equipment they had. Once I got to the ground, to the areas, and actually started working with them as a volunteer, I realized that many of them were wearing flip-flops. And I hate to say this, but also sometimes there were children acting as firefighters, and their only firefighter equipment was that they had written firefighter with a marker on their shirt. I am not the only one who saw children firefighters during the 2019 fires. There are pictures that had been on the media in Bolivia for a long time. Therefore, there has been several human rights violations during this crisis beyond the threats that activists and human rights offenders face at the moment. But again, nothing was done, and the National Declaration of Emergency never came, among other things, because this was right before the elections, and that would have probably meant suspending the elections and changing the budget of the nation to take care of these fires. So, of course, the inevitable ended up happening. This is a picture of 3 of the caskets of the firefighters that passed away that year. In total, there were 7 that passed away in 2019. One of them was actually Pablo Suarez, the younger brother of a member of our movement, Standing Rivers. And it is very sad because the reason these firefighters passed away, at least for some of them, was that they had a heart attack as a result of inhaling too much carbon dioxide, dióxido de carbono, which means that with something as simple as a mask and the proper equipment to protect them, they would probably be here with us today. I wanted you to hear this part of the story before we talk about the actual institutional cost to this, because I feel like many times when we talk about this huge crisis, the human factor is missed in these problems, especially when we talk about environmental issues. People think it's just a bunch of trees burning or something like that, and they don't realize that this has very real consequences in the lives of people. And in my personal experience, the sacrifices that I've seen from volunteer firefighters in my country is something that I will never be able to honor enough and to highlight enough in any space like this one, where I can talk about what we've been through. I'd like to share a video with you that Standing Rivers made. We used this video to protest the laws that made these fires legal. And I think it will help you understand a little bit more of the desperation and the violation to our dignity and our rights and our lives that many of us felt at that point. So it's just 1 minute, it won't be long. Those are women trying to put out the fire with their own hands, just so you get an idea of the high amount of equipment that we had to work with at the moment. So to understand why this is happening, let's back up a little bit and understand what is the area that was lost to fires and is still burning today as we speak. So the Chiquitano Forest in Bolivia is one of the world's largest, most important tropical dry forests. It's around 23 million hectares. It's also one of the most important centers for agricultural activity in the country. The hills and mountains of this region are fundamental to supply water to the Pantanal, which is on the border between Bolivia and Brazil. And obviously, all of this is part of the Amazon basin. And there is a huge, obviously, richness to this area because of all the ecosystem animals and plants that live that are unique to this part of the world, that are endemic and will never be found in any other area of the world. But it is also the home to many indigenous peoples, and even to an indigenous group, the Ayoreo indigenous group, which is uncontacted and of whom we do not know if they are okay or not. So this region, particularly in Bolivia, although it is mostly ignored by the large part of the world, it is very important for the ecosystem and the Amazon basin in itself, and therefore should be protected according to law, not only in our constitution, but according to international law and international treaties that have been signed by the Bolivian government. However, only in 2019, more than 6 million hectares were lost to the fire in this area of Bolivia. More than 1 million of these hectares were in protected areas, so in areas that should be preserved by the government and by municipalities and and just Bolivians in general. The emissions of carbon dioxide was over 159 million tons, which is an extremely high amount if you consider the size of Bolivia and that we only have 11 million inhabitants. And according to what biologists and experts have said in Bolivia, it might take up to 200 years to fully recover. This is what was said during the 2019 fires. However, since we have had even more fires, so I think this is probably an even larger amount now. In terms of animals, recent estimates say that at least 6 million mammals passed away during the fires in 2019. This is only mammals we're talking about, so the numbers for insects and other type of animals in the region, in the area, is undetermined at the moment. And these are, again, only estimates that we're working with. And in the area of Otuquis, again, this is in the border of Brazil and Bolivia. There were more than 1 million dead animals just in this area. And again, more than 1 million hectares were lost in protected areas. Therefore, the real number is something that we will probably not know because there's not much funding for studies in these areas. And even if we do, it's only estimates because the real amount of the region that has been burned has not been able to be properly analyzed, assessed, and maybe ideally prepared for reforestation campaigns or something similar. When it comes to people, in 2019, 7 firefighters passed away during the fires in the same region. 1 farmer passed away last year. More than 400 indigenous communities have been affected. And like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the level of damage to the Ayoreo uncontacted indigenous community is unknown. This is the only community in Latin America that is in voluntary isolation outside of the Amazonia main region, but within the Amazon basin. We do not know what has happened to them. Some scientists think that they may have moved to Paraguay due to the fire, but this is something that hasn't been proven, and we generally don't know what is happening, which is extremely worrying. And what is even sadder to say is that as high as these numbers are, the fires continue today. Just up to this week, over 1.5 million hectares have been lost to the fires in Bolivia. It's important to specify that the fire season, if we want to call it that way, used to be from August. It's starting to start earlier in the year in July and goes all the way to November, usually up until the rain comes, because the 3 times we've had these massive fires, they've been put out because of climate weather conditions, not really because of the response of the Bolivian government. And today, as we speak, children in San Javier and in Concepcion are being evacuated from the region because of how their health, their respiratory tracts have been affected by the smoke coming out of these fires. So not only did these fires have a huge impact and happen in 2019, but they have been repeatedly happen, and what should have been the proper response is to change the laws that caused this. But as we will see today, nothing has changed despite the huge amount of loss. The picture that you see on your screens, by the way, was taken 3 days ago. So sadly, this is an image that we keep seeing year after year. So this leads to the question, I guess, to why is this happen? And I think there is no other way to look at this but legalize fires. What is happening is something that isn't an accident, is something that has actually been encouraged by the government. And we will see a little bit of the history of these laws here today. As you know, the Morales government has been in power in Bolivia, as you may know, hopefully, since 2006. It's his government under Morales as a president lasted until 2019. We then had a transitional government, and now the MAS is back in power with a different president. This government only approved over 10 laws and executive orders which encouraged the use of fire in order to expand the agricultural frontier. The economic gain that is had in Bolivia with soy and beef for export is huge, both for the government and for business elites. I think it's important to highlight this because a lot of people seem to think that the ideology of the MAS party and the Morales government is leftist, therefore it would not be compatible that they would actually be doing these things. But I think one thing that is very important to bear in mind in Bolivia is that you have to judge politicians, and this is probably for the rest of the world as well. You have to judge politicians by the results of their administrations, not so much by the speeches that they give. And in the case of Bolivia, the agricultural business, the agro, as we call it in Bolivia, has a huge influence in the government. And they had it during the Morales government as much as they had it during the transitional government with Yanine Áñez. So you cannot say that this is an ideological matter. It's more of elite and an economic gain matter. And this is how it should be assessed, because this is where it goes at the end. The International Rights of Nature Tribunal, in their 2019 judgment of what happened in Bolivia, named these fires an ecocide. And I would really like to highlight this portion where they say that this is an ecocide caused by state policy and agribusiness. And it has been caused actively both by the Morales government and the Áñez government, because when they did this judgment, it was also happening during the 2020 fire crisis as well. So they, the fact that this International Rights of Nature Tribunal deemed this as an ecocide was a huge victory for those of us on the ground, because this tribunal itself was created and kind of pushed into existence with the support of the Morales government. Having an international body that can look at the situation from a neutral perspective from the outside and come up with an analysis that is equally that has the same results as the analysis of those of us who were on the ground, I think in a way validates the points of view of civil society, although I also argue that the points of view of civil society on the ground should be the first one that you listen to. And I shouldn't have to have this validation from international entities in order for you to listen to the points of Bolivians on the ground. And if we look at these fires, what we call it in Bolivia is perdonazo. This kind of means like a big forgiveness. So to understand how this has been encouraged by the government, you have to see that this began kind of in a retroactive way. In 2013, laws were passed by the Bolivian government that gave a forgiveness to the people that have started fires illegally without permission between 1996 and 2011. That means that even people that burned certain amounts of forest before the Morales government came into power already had a pardon, a legal pardon for doing this by the payment of a small fee. We will see the amount of that fee soon. In 2014, with the law 502, this pardon was extended for 12 more months, and in 2015 for 18 months. Institutions in Bolivia like the CEDIP were calling the attention to this, explaining that you could not give pardons to people who started fires in this kind of areas, especially during dry season and during fire season, because this would lead to bigger fires and to a higher risk, not only to the health of people living in these areas, but also to the indigenous community living within the Chiquitano Forest that is uncontacted by the outside world. But this was obviously disregarded by the government, as it tends to be in situations like this. I wanted to highlight this article within this law that says that it is exceptionally established that the beneficiaries of properties that enroll in this program, it's talking about the food program to which this pardon applies, will pay a single amount by concept of administrative sanctions, so only administrative costs for clearing without authorization. And in the case of small or collective properties, the cost will be even lower. So essentially what you're doing is you have a government who has weak institutions, who doesn't have enough resources to properly monitor and put out the fires when they start in the first place, but you're also giving a legal pardon to the people that do it illegally in any way. So there's absolutely no incentive for people that want to gain money by changing the function of the land that they own from not doing it with fires. And then again, in 2015, another law comes in that authorizes a clearing of up to 20 hectares by family. And then in 2019, the regulatory standard changes, saying that you can pay less than $3 per illegally burned hectare. So whenever there is a huge fire and you have to bring a lot of resources to the area, the people that started the fire, according to the law, have to pay less than $3. That is not even the cost for water for the firefighters, equipments, and teams when they come to this area. And then Law 3973, which was passed in 2019, this is actually a Supreme decree, is the one that kind of tipped everything off the edge, although the legal framework had already been establishing starting 10 years ago. So to understand why this law was passed, though, I would like to highlight this. In 2019, the Bolivian government made a deal with the Chinese government. This was announced in the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, saying that we would be selling them up to 20,000 tons of beef in the next 6 months. Obviously, this made agribusiness elites very happy. You can see when this news were announced, this is a picture that came out, and you can see the president and many other people from the agribusiness institutions holding beef very proudly. This would mean that there would be a huge economical gain, both for the government and for the producers, but it also meant that we had to export in half a year what had previously been exported in 20 years. Therefore, we had to produce in half a year what had previously been produced in 20 years. And obviously, for beef production, you need cattle, you need space for this, and you had to amplify, you had to have a bigger area for cattle to be pastured. And obviously, there were many reasons why I am not saying that this is the only reason the fires happened. There is obviously also a huge amount of trafficking of wood from forests, from trees in that area. There is also a huge amount of narco traffic, which also affects the work of the firefighters. But by any means, albeit we don't have numbers for narco traffic, the biggest gain was for the government and this deal with China, which meant that we would need to produce a lot more beef than we usually do. So when this deal was signed in 2019, it was impossible not to notice how just a couple months later, in July 9, 2019, the Morales government enacted Supreme Decree 3973. The Supreme Decree expanded the amount of land that was up for clearance. It went from 4 million hectares to 9 million hectares in Beni alone. And it also authorized the use of, quote, controlled fires for that goal in private and community lands, both in Santa Cruz and Beni. Why I think it's so important that we look at this specific law, and that I hope this can give you a little bit more context, is that when the government authorizes the use of fires by saying that it has to be controlled fires, it means that the government should have the means to control those fires or to take care of them should they get out of hand. However, firefighters in Bolivia are voluntary. They don't have, they still today don't have the amount of equipment and heavy machinery necessary to fight fires in this sort of region where access and transportation is so difficult. And at the same time, the institutions that should be monitoring these fires, this controlled fires, this permitted fires by law, are not really present in this area because the state is so weak that we don't have state present in all of the Chiquitano region. This means that the illusion of a controlled fire doesn't really exist because you don't have the means to either monitor them, to respond to these fires when they get out of hand, or to actually bring justice to the people that cause these fires without permission, because at the end of the day, there is a law that says that they have a pardon should they do it. However you look at it, the idea of controlled fires is nothing but an illusion to Bolivia, and an illusion that has cost even human lives and obviously millions of forests. As a result, April, you signed the deal to sell beef to China by 20 times the usual amount. July, you made it legal to use fires in forest areas. August, this is how the map of Santa Cruz looked. There is all the very dark red areas are the extreme levels of risk of fires. As you can see, that was the majority of the territory at that time. I repeat, we only have volunteer firefighters. The ones trained by the government are in very low numbers, and they are not specialized in forest fires necessarily. So all of this amount of fire was created in our country by the government, encouraged by the government, and pardoned by the government. But still, there was not enough capacity to handle this crisis, which is why the images that you saw earlier, and to be honest, the deaths of people don't even begin to describe the amount of grief and desperation that we felt at that moment. Another law that we need to look, besides the ones that allow and encourage the use of fire, is also, this is what causes the fires. When they are happening, how do you respond to them? We have a law, it's called 602, which is the risk management law, that regulates how the declaration of disaster has to be done, both on the municipal level, the govern the state level, if you want to call it that way, the federal level, and then the general national level. When you look at this law, it states that first, the municipalities have to say that they have spent all of their budget for the year, and only then they can ask for help from the next level of government, the regional one. Once this happens, the regional government has to take care of the emergency, and only when all of their budget of the year has been spent, they can appeal for the national government to come in and take care of this and also start spending their budget in this. What this doesn't take into consideration, and I find this, I wouldn't have understood this had I not been there as a volunteer, because again, it's very easily to get distracted by what the law says when you don't really know the ground in countries like mine, is that there is not only such a high level of corruption, because it's not only corruption in the municipal level and in every level of government, but also there are so many informal expenses within municipalities that when a municipality is in a state of emergency, when the lives of the people in the area are running a big risk and you are literally in a state of crisis, you can not ask such weak institutions who have people working in them that may have the best of wills, but they are not as organized, and they don't even have enough resources to be as organized as you would want them to be able to sit down and write a whole report of their expenses of the year in order to apply for help from the next level of government. Many times what would happen is that the municipality in the region, the one that would be in charge of what was happening, would see that there is clearly an emergency, a huge amount of fire coming to them. So they would ask firefighters, volunteer firefighters, again, that's all we have, to come in and help. However, when volunteer firefighters came to the municipalities, because they are volunteers, because they are an independent body, because they are not part of the municipality itself, the municipality could not spend money to feed them, to house them, to support them, to provide water, medical help, or any sort of support. Because if they did, they could be charged for corruption, for spending money in a body that is external to the state structure. This meant that every time this happened, every time we had an emergency and volunteer firefighters were called by authorities and mobilized to the ground, the state could not take care of them. Therefore, volunteers such as Standing Rivers and many other groups on the grounds would be the ones bearing the job of, and it's not a bearing. We are very happy to do this. We are honored to do this, but we also understand that this is not how it should be done. We would be the ones providing support from them in terms of help, food, medical equipment, and anything else they might need. On top of that, when you ask to the next level of government to take care of this, to come and help because clearly it was an emergency situation, they would respond to us, well, the municipality has not declared an emergency, therefore we cannot go in, because if we do, we might get put in trial for corruption by higher levels of government in the central government, therefore we cannot do anything. So it's a complete disorganization of how the system works. This law should have been changed long ago. And on top of that, there is no way in this regulation where we, the citizenry, can push the government to declare a national emergency. It has to be done through traditional, very slow channels. I have to add too that even though municipalities are very important, they receive very little funding from the central government or the regional governments. Therefore, they don't have the means to hire extra people to help them in moments of need and moments of crisis. And on top of that, as if all of this wasn't enough, there is also a big, as you may know, polarization in Bolivia. And when you have a municipality from a party that was opposed to the party that was in the regional level or in the central level, because they are in this little political quarrels and they are trying their best to make their opponent look as bad as possible, they would not collaborate. And sometimes municipalities that had people that were passing out because they couldn't breathe in them, they would not want to declare emergency because they thought that that would make their opponents and the next level of government look like they were the big guys who were coming to help. So however you look at it, it is a complete disaster. And again, the worst of it is that in the end, it's not only a matter of disorganization or of seeing how weak states don't work at the ground level. It is also an issue of the fact that, okay, the state is not working, but where is the space where the citizenry, where civil society can interject to make the situation better? How can we appeal to the state so that it organizes itself? And there is no such space for communication democratically with civil society because anything is seen as an attempt of trying to do something illegal and take power away from the government, to put it in a nice way. As a result, people were very angry, and this is one protest of many that we had across the country that year. This was more than 1 million people that were protesting, demanding a declaration of national emergency. We were demanding that the laws were changed that caused and allowed for these fires to happen in the first place. And we were also asking for transparency as to why the national emergency was not being declared. Again, this is only one picture. This was more than 1 million people protesting, which is highly, I think, inspirational for me up until this day, because it's a country with 11 million people and 1 million of them was in this protest. And this is only one. We had this protest in more than 5 countries. And the sad part is that among all of the political turmoil and everything that has happened in Bolivia since, the petition to annul these laws was just left hanging in the air, both by the government and by the party in government at the moment and by their opponents. And again, these little political fights end up taking more space than the actual demands of the people. So all of this led to the situation that you see today. As I mentioned, even though the president of Bolivia went on a public press conference saying that they were asking for help from the international community and that they had declared a state of emergency, this was never really formally, legally done through the Legislative Assembly. Therefore, the entrance of support was never allowed. And this led to a lot of confusion. Among this, one of the things that happened was that from Argentina, from Jujuy, a team of firefighters as well as planes were trying to come into the country to offer help. But since the government never responded and the Cancilleria, Foreign Ministry, never completed the paperwork so they could come in the end, these planes that were coming to help ended up leaving and going someplace else. This is just one example of many things that happened in that moment. I remember there were teams coming from France to help as well who couldn't enter. In 2020, this was 2019, 2020 last year, there were many groups that were also trying to come to help from different parts of the world. I participated in coordinating the arrival of volunteer firefighters from Spain. It was also very difficult to get them there. Civil society, we had to kind of get ourselves organized in order to be able to afford their flights and their stay and give them phones so they had a way to communicate. And I think as students and people that work in international relations, it's very important that you understand that sometimes, even though the governments are not cooperating and regimes don't get along with each other or governments don't get along with each other, you have to coordinate with civil society, because at the end of the day, we are the ones that often will be able to execute the help more in a faster way, and also the ones that are in bigger need of them. And your support is needed, even if it's not a pleasant experience to coordinate in some cases with certain governments. Another case of international support that we had was a super tanker. This is an image I wanted to share with you. The government made it sound that because we had one super tanker airplane, things were taken care of. Judge by yourselves. As you can see, the amount of land that was burning compared to the amount of fire that could be put out by the super tanker was very low. And I think the ignorance of a big part of the population also allowed for the government to get away with this and pretend that they had done something huge, because airplanes never put out fires. What puts out fires is the coordinated efforts of firefighters who then go after the airplane, drop the retardant on the area to be able to extinguish the fire. I know, both because I got to speak with some of the people working on this operation and also because, again, we were there, that there was no coordination between where the supertanker was discharging the retardant or the water and the firefighters on the ground. They didn't know where they had to go and extinguish the fire that, in theory, had been put out by the supertanker. And when this happens, it's not only a huge amount of resources that have been wasted without bringing any real results, but this is also a very legitimate and conscious case of corruption. You do not expend so much money hiring something as big as this, being ignorant that you need another part of the equation in order to complete the operation successfully. And again, this goes to how governments, and I think especially in the case of authoritarian governments or those who are leaning in that direction, would go to any means to defend their reputation, but not really to bring results to the people. And this again brings me to the point that you have to listen to civil society. You cannot always trust to what governments are saying, especially in places where democracy and rule of law, it's not really guaranteed for those living in that place. Another reason why I think it's also very important that international bodies start coordinating more with groups on the ground that are not part of any governmental institutions, it's because sometimes when the government receives donations and civil society is not aware about it, there's no way to demand that it's delivered, that there's no way to do check and balances to make sure that it arrives to people that need it. And the picture you're looking at is of something that happened a month ago in Tarija. This is a different region from the Chiquitano Forest, but nonetheless, it is a region that was also affected by fires in 2019. A donation from the Belgian government with firefighting suits for more than 100 firefighters was just left in a place where it ended up rotting because of the humidity. It was never delivered to the people that needed it, even though the groups in Tarija are not difficult to contact, and they had been asking both the government and civil society for donations. And this donation was made in 2019, and only a month ago it was discovered, and most of the equipment was not able to be used. And again, this is what happens when there is no way for us, the people affected by the crisis, to know what is being received by the government and if it's being properly distributed. However, not to be completely negative, I think there is something almost miraculous to what happened during these fires, and it's that given the lack of action by the government, the persecution of those who are demanding action and asking the international community to support people on the ground, and given that foreign aid was also not able to come in, civil society had to organize themselves, most of the time through informal means, so not through NGOs, but through informal, essentially WhatsApp group chats, to do things. But we managed to do amazing things because otherwise many more lives would have been lost. More than 5 different cities organized themselves to send support to firefighter teams on the ground. The movement that I'm a part of, Standing Rivers, we coordinated neighborhood locations for people to bring their donations in these cities. Obviously not in every single neighbor, but we try to cover most of the areas on these 5 cities. And in coordination as well with local airlines, we managed to bring these donations to Santa Cruz, and from there we would bring them ourselves and deliver them to the firefighters. One of the reasons why I think this was very effective was that people trusted us more, not because of who we were, but because they could see through social media with live transmissions on Facebook and other types of social media that the things that they were delivering in the donation centers were actually reaching the hands of the firefighters on the ground. I also think that it should really ring many alarms that so many people trust informal groups that are not even NGOs more than they trust their own government to provide support. But I also think that this is often framed as people not trusting the government, but we should look at this as the government never giving any reason to earn this trust in the first place, and people trying to find a way to make sure that what needs to be done gets done. Just through informal means, again, there were over 40 tons of supplies delivered to firefighters in different areas. We are talking about medicine, food, firefighting equipment, the ones that we could find or bring into the country, and medical medicines and things needed by the firefighters when they came back to rest from their 8, sometimes 12, 18-hour shifts. What is very sad is that the official numbers of all the help that was given by different citizen groups is unclear because, again, given the informality of all of these operations, there is no way to actually keep track of this. And I think this is a huge, huge loss for civil society itself, because in a country like Bolivia, where often the concept that we have of ourselves as a people is so low, having a knowledge of our own capacities would be a good way for people to start realizing of their own power and to feel empowered as citizens and to realize that there are many things that we can do by ourselves, and therefore also demand more from the people that are in government and that can do things because they have been appointed to do so by the people. And at the same time, I really, really would like to end on this note, and it's that while many people wonder what can be done, how can we make sure, that is a question I often get, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Well, in the case of the people in the audience today, I understand that many of you are either studying international relations, working in this area, or coordinating or working with people that work in this area. It's very important that we reframe the way in which we think of international aid. A lot of times it is seen as someone coming in and giving assistance to someone else. And then people like me, people from countries like mine, we are seen as passive receivers of this so-called aid. But this is not how it should be. If you want to operate in an environment different than your own, especially in countries like mine, where the formation of the state itself was not built by the agreement of all the people living in this country, but instead of certain elites ignoring and abusing indigenous groups and other parts of the population, you have to understand that states and countries like mine don't work like states in Western countries or in any other part of the world. You cannot expect that because there is a law in the Constitution that says that Mother Earth has rights, which is the case for the Bolivian Constitution. This means that the rights of the Amazon forest in Bolivia are being respected, and thinking that by the changing of specific laws, or that because our government leaders give really good speeches at the UN calling out other countries in their environmental or human rights injustices, that means that we must be doing really well. That is really, really patronizing and even colonialistic, because you're not recognizing that what you need to do is take off your glasses of how you analyze your reality and realize that in other countries, things can be masked and they can be portrayed as you want to see them, instead of looking at the reality on the ground and what civil society groups are doing. In the case of Bolivia, I really, really think that the solution for these things to not happen again cannot be done through any other way but by the empowering and strengthening of civil society. It doesn't matter how many institutions, whether it's the EU, the UN, other embassies, come into the country and bring more help in the form of donations, as long as civil society cannot monitor authorities, cannot keep track of the things that authorities are receiving and whether they are delivering them themselves, as long as we keep being put away from the conversations on how to address these issues, you will never be able to truly solve them, because the reality is that there's a lot of people that profit from these situations. There are millions of dollars that come into the Bolivian government every time we have a crisis of this size, but because we are not even aware of them, we cannot control that they actually make it to the right place. And at the end of the day, international or foreign aid should not be a vertical, pitiful arm that certain countries give to countries like mine when they're going through a really rough time. It should be helping to build the institutions and the civil society that can make sure that we get out of this dependence loop. I'm sorry if I'm taking too long, but I really want to make a lot of emphasis in this point and finally highlight that even though the situation is quite discouraging, like I mentioned today, children are being evacuated from this very same area again that is once again on fire. The most important thing to keep in mind is that Bolivians will keep helping. Firefighters are not going to stop going to these areas just because we're not receiving international help. So in the end, the more we do to bring justice to this and that to make sure that we do give help to the immediate needs, but we also change the structures that cause this injustice to be perpetuated for so long, only then when we do both things, we will be able to solve them. I am leaving some contact info in case you're interested. I thank you so much for your time. I hope this was in some way educative for you. And once again, I think all honor from my end goes to the firefighters that today are once again fighting this crisis.
Thank you so much, Jhanisse. And to everyone who registered for this event, we will also pass out that contact information so that they can contact you and look at the site for Ríos de Pie. And thank you so much for your comments and for shedding light on this issue, which I can guarantee you many people did not know much about. I wanted to start with one question, but first I want to remind everyone who has a question. I've seen a couple. The chat has started to light up here, but please send me your questions in the chat and I will serve as moderator here for the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. Oh man, I'm getting, okay, they're starting to come in now, which is good. But my first question as the moderator, I wonder, Bolivia, of course, and Brazil, those are not the only countries in South America that have that are part of the Amazon rainforest. And I'm wondering the extent to which you know about how the fires are being put down in other parts or in other countries of the Amazon. I mean, are there any sort of examples that the Bolivian government can look to, or are there any countries that are doing it right that we can learn from, or is the larger part of your story the fact that politics is completely undermining the efforts of the firefighters on the ground?
Before looking at case studies, I think the theory about how to put out forest fires says enough about how it should be done. And in that case, there are two main things that are necessary to put out a forest fire. One is a proper coordination with teams on the ground and also teams from the government, whether they are on the municipal, regional, or national level. And at the same time, the distribution of resources according to a proper assessment of the situation, especially when you have, like today in Santa Cruz, 20 forest fires happening at the same time. So these two things should be done, and they shouldn't only be done during emergency season. They should be practiced and articulated previously. But again, up until today, there's not one team of coordinated, specialized firefighters that know about forest fires that are working in all levels of the government, as there should be. This sort of group work, teamwork has not been created, even though it was demanded by environmental groups like the one I'm a part of. When we were asking for prevention of the fires, we were talking about this since the end of fire season last year. And at the same time, the distribution of resources is so unclear, it is so not transparent, and there is also not a specific institution that is in charge of doing this, although in theory, the regional government, the governorship should be doing this. That if you look at it from a purely theoretical perspective, before even comparing to other countries, the two main things that you need to put out a fire don't exist in Bolivia. And they will continue not existing as long as the people working in the government making the decision as to how we fight these fires are not specialized in this issue, which they're not. They're often appointed by whether they are of sympathy of the party that controls, whether it's the central government or the regional government. So there is not enough value of real academic, I guess, knowledge, not even academic, but just professional knowledge. And the fact that, again, people that do know this from the outside don't have an avenue to demand this from the government with effectiveness, because there is no such conversation happening, also makes things more difficult. Now, if we want to look specifically at case studies, I don't know, I don't think Brazil is something we can compare with Hope, but I know how it's been done in Spain. And for example, in this case, after fire seasons there, I know that they came up with a law that said that the areas that had been burned could not be used for new economic functions, which I think sort of kills the incentive of burning such a huge amount of land. But again, in Bolivia, not only there are not new laws to protect the areas, the laws that cause this, all the ones that I explained to you, are still in place. Not one of them has been taken out since this fire started.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the question that the chat is lighting up here, I want to ask a question by Professor Thomas Schwartz, who asks, how would the Bolivian government react to the attempt by American NGOs to send assistance directly to Bolivian civil society groups? Would they attempt to stop such efforts?
I think this is already happening in a very small scale. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to stop such efforts, because this is what already happened in 2019, even though the help was not coming from the US government itself, but from other NGOs within the US that wanted to provide help after seeing the raising awareness work that some people did, including ourselves. They just refused to accept it. And again, the only help that they accepted was, for example, an airplane from Russia that was supposedly a donation to help us fight these fires. But in the end, during the transitional government, we found out that we owed more than $1 million for this plane. So again, you can see that there's a very clear geopolitical frame which guides as to what they would accept. But I wouldn't think this means that we shouldn't try, especially when we are in crisis like in this moment. Pressure from the people does end up moving things sometimes.
Great. All right, I have another question from Mercedes, and she writes, as a fellow Bolivian from Tarija, I remember, and she says, I may be wrong, that elections were coming up. Because of this, the people were getting ready to fight back against the MAS, because of fraudulent elections. And I remember the fires coincidentally happened during this time, most likely to try to distract us from the fraudulent elections and put our attention on the fire. Do you think these fires happened only because of the economical reasons you stated, or because of other interests the MAS had too? Also, I just wanted to say thank you, because this was a very hard time for us Bolivians, especially us living there at the moment and seeing everyone with our own eyes. It's good to show people outside what is happening.
Thank you. There are definitely more incentives than just the big economical incentives of the beef export to China. Like I mentioned, there is a lot of narco traffic in this area, and an airplane's landing road was found within a protected area recently, and it's clearly been used to transport cocaine, basically, and drugs out of this area. So it is known for those of us that work there that even for firefighters, sometimes it's very difficult to put out fires because there are certain areas that you cannot access because the narco traffickers just don't want you there, and they come out and they threaten you. There are many fabrics of drugs hidden within these areas that should be untouched, preserved, and protected. So there are many different incentives. And we also realized last year that while I do think that the 2019 fires were in a way clearly intentional, because again, fires cannot happen accidentally in this area, but they have to be by man-made causes, I do think it got out of the government's hands. However, last year, there were many fires in protected areas that were not the same region, and that firefighters found people setting fire to car wheels, and a very clear mark of where people had purposely started these fires. And obviously it has left a huge trauma effect on the population. It is a good way to distract people from what is going politically. It is also a good way for certain groups to have a stronger narrative against their political opponents. So there are many interests that intertwine here. But again, I think the first thing we need to look at is what is causing them. And this will keep on happening as long as legally these fires and the people that start them are allowed to go in complete impunity.
Will asks, how at risk is Madidi National Park? Has it been burned at all, or has the government protected it because it is a valuable ecotourism destination?
No, it is actually in high risk. There is an indigenous leader whose name I would like to share on the chat right now, if I can. His name is Alex Virica. The Madidi National Park is under a high risk, but for a different reason. It's not so much about fires, but they are building a hydroelectric dam in the area. This is done by Chinese companies. And to create this dam in Balachepete, they would have to relocate, to say it nicely, but in reality is you are taking out of their territory more than, I think, 50 different indigenous groups. So there is a high threat to the Madidi area. This dam, Rositas, had been approved previously. It came to a stop because of protests from indigenous groups, but it has been recently reactivated as a project from the state, ENDE, the electrical state institution. So although the Madidi, obviously as part of the Amazon as well, has a huge value, it is also under high risk. And I think every protected area in Bolivia is, because with the huge economic crisis that we have right now, the government really needs money. They will not get it as they used to in previous years from gas, because gas prices had gone down around the world. And the fastest way to do it is, as every other government in Bolivia has done, just exploit our natural resources. And obviously this puts in risk a lot of indigenous groups and national territories.
I'm wondering, with the 2021 fire season already underway, I'm wondering, is there anything different from this season? Is it proceeding very much along the lines as the 2020 and 2019 fire seasons. Are you seeing anything different that has already begun occurring this year that perhaps you haven't seen in previous years?
I do see a huge difference. It's not necessarily a positive one, although it may sound like it at first. 2019, it was uncomfortable for authorities in every level to recognize how severe and bad the fires were. I don't think they were counting on social media and environmental groups like ours to be able to bring this to the attention of people. Now, every level of government wants to act like they are doing what they should be doing. The problem is that they create a false sense of security and of effectiveness that is not really happening. They pretend as if, for example, I will give a very clear example. There is a fire in the area called Otuquis on the border between Brazil and Bolivia. We knew this fire had been going for at least 4 days without being reported or recognized by state entities. We reported about this fire. We asked people to please help with donations because we knew that the government was not sending firefighters to the area. And immediately the next day, the environmental minister gave a press conference saying that everything was controlled, that they already had people in the area, and that there was no problem, that everything was fine. This is not only a problem because they do this to protect their image, but also when you give people a false sense of safety, they stop donating. And as I explained in the presentation, most of the support for the volunteer firefighter groups in the area comes from donations. So it's not that we want people to be scared, but we need them to know the truth. If things are not controlled, if things are still out of control and there's no governmental support to firefighters in the area, we need people to know that so that they can help, that they can bring donations, they can organize and respond to the calls that we do for help. But when you have different levels of government trying to act like they are on top of it and creating, obviously they're really good at social media, many posts, press conferences, images saying that everything is fine. At the end of the day, the one thing that has been saving us, to say it that way, and I'm very thankful for technology, is satellite images. Every time they say that everything is under control, we can go find satellite images through different programs and prove that no, the fire is still there. Nothing is under control. And this is, again, what is happening right now. We have more than 25 fires active today.
Please, I mean, the questions are open. Please feel free to send me questions for Jhanisse in the chat, and I'll be happy to ask them to her. I'm continuing to watch the chat here, and we have just a few more minutes. So I have another question, and I actually have tons more questions, but we only have just a few more minutes here, Jhanisse. But I mean, one of our biggest programs here at the Bush School is American diplomacy. We train future foreign service officers, which is how actually through mutual contacts we met. And I'm wondering, you know, a junior foreign service officer in the embassy in La Paz, for example, what sorts of things can people like junior foreign service officers, or, you know, people that are working for NGOs or that sort of thing in a country like Bolivia, starting out fresh out of grad school, what kinds of things can our students going out into the world like that keep in mind if they were stationed in a place like Bolivia and, you know, now having been privy to this narrative about the Amazon fires and, you know, and its entanglement in the political tumult of Bolivia? I mean, what is it that they can actually do, you think?
Probably as in any other area of professional work, to do anything effectively, you need to have a good strategy. And for a good strategy, you need to have a good analysis. Mm-hmm. If foreign workers in a country like mine base their analysis only by listening and reading opinion leaders in newspapers and people in political elites, I think their analysis will be incomplete. It's very important that before you proceed to take action, you have a complete analysis of the situation, and that includes talking to and listening to civil society leaders, to dissidents from the government, and to people that are not part of the power structures that are often in place. To me, it was surprising when I talked to some ambassadors in Bolivia. I've been lucky enough to talk to many of them and realize that many of the things that I was telling them about, for example, why the law to declare national emergency didn't work and will never work for us because of how things work in the ground. They were completely unaware of it. They were also very surprised when we told them that we knew they had given donations to a specific institution of the government, and we also knew that those donations had been resold through the Bolivian version of eBay to people in other department, in other city, and that we knew that those had never made it to us, and we even know where they ended up. To me, it's surprising that they can be ignorant of these things because this is their job. They should know. And in order to be able to know that, they have to listen to more people than just their immediate environment in the capital city or in the city of state. So have a complete analysis. And to do that, make sure that you listen both to people, obviously, within the red circle, but also listen to people that are only civil society actors, and especially the ones that are on the ground on issues like this.
Absolutely. Well, Jhanisse, thank you so much for speaking to our community here, and thank you to all of you who attended this talk. It was a fantastic experience, a new perspective. I want to remind you all that our next talk from the Other Side of the Border series will be on Wednesday, November 10th, with border correspondent and author Alfredo Corchado, and it will be hopefully in person. And we will also broadcast it via Zoom. Jhanisse, thank you again for your time. We'll probably just stick on here for a few more minutes. And thank you to all of you, and hope everybody has a lovely evening. Thank you.